Okay, Mary Ann, do you want to do roll?
Mr. Britton?
Here.
Ms. Ruska? Here. Dr. King?
Here.
Mr. Moon?
Here.
Mr. Walsh?
Here.
Mr. Welch?
Here.
Mr. Cindy?
Here. Okay, for discussion information items, we have no FOIA requests this month. Our next item on the agenda is the monthly budget report. Tim, you want to talk about that? Or Kevin?
In the report that I sent to you, the revenue for the month in the operating funds, $2.8 million. In all funds, the revenue is $3.6 million. Significantly more than it's been the past couple of months, and the main reason for that is we started receiving property taxes. We received a little over $3 million in the month of October on property taxes. They were due November 1st, so we will receive the bulk of that money in November, but we did receive $3 million in October. That also is the reason for the difference between this year and last year. Last year at this time, because of the late date that the property taxes were due, which was December 1st or even later, I think, we had received at this point in the year $122,000 in property tax revenue compared to this year $3 million. So that's the main difference if you look at our revenue in terms of this year versus last year. I also noted that the student fee account has gone up a little bit over $500,000. We did have a check that we wrote in the month of November. It's in the bills. That's money going back to Riverside Brookfield and going into the activity accounts. So it's coming out of the board accounts, going into the activity accounts. We're also going to transfer in the month of November, which you'll see next month when you get the financials, about $80,000 from that textbook line item into the other fee accounts for parking, technology, and athletics. Those accounts will still be under budget, but we still have about $70,000 right now that is due in fees that has not been paid. And we'll start aggressively, trying to collect that money. I have a meeting, in fact, next week with the company that we use for collections. In terms of the expenditures for the operating funds, $2.1 million, approximately the same thing for all of the funds, a little bit higher. I noted some of the more significant items in the report to you. As usual, salaries and benefits makes up $1.5 million out of that $2.1 million, so the most significant part of it. In comparison to last year we had one certified payroll in the month of August. This year we had 2 certified payrolls in the month of August. So it kind of throws the comparison from this year to last year off by about almost $600,000. I also noted that we had a number of items, expenditure line items in the transportation fund that were over budget. That's partly because we were using First Student to do some of the transportation on field trips. Illinois Central didn't have enough personnel to supply us with the buses that we needed at the time. Our contract allows us to bill them back, which we have done. We've billed them $4,500 for the month of October. I think we're going to be billing them another $1,500 this week. So once that money starts coming back in and goes back into those accounts will drop back under budget. Let's see, there were some questions on the bills.
We'll take that under the bill section.
Okay.
Any other items on the budget? Tim, that you want to speak about?
No.
Any questions for Tim on the budget?
We've got 20. What are they? There's 25 line items that are over budget so far this year. About $25,000.
Some of those are the transportation,
okay,
which I just talked about. Others are, we have the policy basically is we allow people to go over budget on certain line items if as long as within their department they stay under budget.
And you manage that then?
Yes.
Tim?
Those
Okay.
people generally come to me, tell me that they're going to go over budget on one line item and they're going to stay under on the other.
And you monitor that then, right?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions for Tim?
So
All right.
when we do the questions on bills, they're gonna relate back to budget, because I don't see
Well,
any.
then keep your budget with you and keep it on the side, but we have a special section for invoices and minutes to be paid, and that's when we talk about it then. All right, the next one is a school report card. Who's going to speak on that?
I will.
Okay.
Just, getting through all the. So I just wanted to include in the board packet the Illinois School Report Card that comes out at the end of every October. There were a few questions on that. Pam is prepared to address a few in regards to test scores and to a few of the other questions that were presented. However, one thing that Pam and I noticed that when we were looking through this is that some of the questions that were asked don't relate because we don't give ISATs, and we only have a small amount of students that do an IAA, which is the Illinois Alternative Assessment. And so Pam said, updated me that they had some issues last year with our school report card, and we have some issues this year. They are still joining us with the Riverside Elementary District. And I'm not quite sure if that's because when Dr. Barnett was the interim superintendent, and he was previously registered as the superintendent of 96. But we spoke to them today, and they recognize that there are some errors, and that I'm working with one of their employees to correct that. But this would be the second year in a row that we had some issues with our school report card, where they're adding data from 96 to 208's report card.
If I could just elaborate on that a bit, you can look up the school report card two ways. You can look it up. You can look up the district report card. That if we were a multi-school district, then you could look at the schools individually as well. So there is on the ISB website, there is a district version, and then there is a school version. And in the school version, it's a little bit thinner because the district one, they are telling us, they're giving us the scores for fourth graders and eighth graders, which we don't have. So
What
we have
page are
some
you at?
bonus scores here. So
What page are you at?
that is not in the one that you have. You have the
Okay.
school report card,
All right.
but that's what's throwing some of our numbers off. We think that's throwing off some of our FTE numbers. It's throwing off some of our all-state tests. If you notice, all of our state tests, when you compare them to what the state is, it looks like we're below, but when you look at our PSAE performance, we're about 20 points above. It can't be our Illinois alternate assessments. That is, the alternative assessment is given to special ed students. We only had 4 students take that test last year. So this has to be, when we called down to the state, they said all state tests include the PSAE, the Illinois alternative assessment, and the ISATs. Well, obviously these scores that don't really belong to our school are being thrown into that category. So they have to correct that at the state level, and that's where they're pulling that data from. You know, we're assuming that that's from from the Riverside feeder district. So just thought I'd explain that. There are some other interesting numbers that don't exactly match, and that would be, for instance, if you notice the state enrollment board member asked me, why do we have half as many students taking the science test as the reading and math? And that's because reading and math is grades 3 through 11, and science is only grades 4, 7, and 11 in the state. So they don't represent as many test takers, and that's why it's a little bit different. And we had one male student, who got counted for the science test, but if you noticed, the numbers were different for reading and math by one person. That was an English language learner, first year in the country, and because of the language barrier, the math score could count, but the science and the English can't. So you see some anomalies or some interesting variances in the data. A question was why, if they gave us an attendance rate as another indicator on that page, it's for you, page 9, it's that summary of annual yearly progress. Why doesn't it show our attendance rate? I reported that to you earlier this year, and that was 94.7 according to the new standards that are imposed on us, the way that the state is drawing and the federal government are drawing that data. Why it doesn't appear on here, I'm not sure. I went back several years in the state report card. It never shows on here, and we looked up some other schools, and it doesn't show on theirs either. So it's just one of those odd state report card facts of interest. So,
One
does
thing
anyone
that-
have any questions?
One thing I do want to highlight for you, on page 5 of the copy that you should have in your packet, as you can see, it gives both the school and the district. We are well exceeding what the state average is on both the Prairie State Achievement Exam as well as the ACT. So I think we're doing a very good job. I think our teachers are doing a very good job. Academics are very sound. We have some good interventions in place, and this is something that, even though we didn't make AYP, the last report that I saw from the superintendent's West 40 roundtable that I'm a part of, it looks as if around eight high schools made AYP in the Illinois. So the number is minimal, having 85% of your juniors reaching. So that for us to have 75% in math and 68% in reading, I think we're doing a strong job.
Any questions for Pam or Kevin on this?
Yeah, just Mrs. Bilesman. Going to page 3, under our revenue funding. I've asked this question before, but perhaps we can verify it based on some of the information on page 1. Under general state aid, we get 4.1%. On average in the state, they get 14.9 from the state. Not that you're going to collect it very quickly, but still it's a staggeringly high number compared to ours. In federal funding, it's 2.1, and on average, it's 12.4. Is that based on the percentage of low-income people, or is it have to do with instruction or learning ability?
I think the majority of it is based on your
Right.
low income
Tim, do you want to address the
families.
general state aid, how that's determined?
Well, general state aid is based on, it's the average daily attendance by your students, the best 3 months, the average, multiplied by what they call the foundation amount, which this year I believe is $6,119 per student. But then they deduct from that the amount of local revenue that you have available, which in our case is fairly significant. So it drops our general state aid down to a fairly low number.
So in spite of our challenges at a relatively flat revenue stream, it's still considered, we still are considered in better financial shape than most of the districts that are on part of this average.
Yeah, I mean, in our case, 85% of our revenue comes from property
Yeah.
taxes. That
Yeah,
certainly
80
is not common.
87?
Yeah, 87. right.
I wouldn't say that would definitely help us be in a better financial shape. It just shows that we are strictly supported on the backs of our taxpayers.
Well, there's a certain advantage to it as far as autonomy, but it's still a huge difference in money.
Yeah, you know, that when the state sends down mandates, though,
Yeah.
they don't send any funding with
There's
it.
nothing free.
Right.
Well, another way of saying what Dan said is, if you take the general state aid, the other state funding, the federal funding, ours is 7.9%, and the state average is 34.8%.
Yeah.
And they don't look at what our finances are, they look at how much we have paid per head, right? It's
Correct.
that's an adjustment for that.
Okay, any other questions?
I have one other one, Pam. Why is
What page?
on page 7, why is are the state numbers for the science so much different than the other two?
That's what I was talking about. They only include 3 grades instead of grades 3
Oh,
through
okay,
11.
I'm sorry.
It's only those 3 grades.
Okay, oh, so for the total, I was...
So the total amount of
Okay.
students that they're looking at is a smaller amount.
Okay, thank you, you
You're
did say
welcome.
that.
Also, you should look at page 3 for expenditures by funds. There's a $19,794,000 expenditure in capital, site construction and capital improvement, which would normally not be there. All right, Tim?
Right.
Anybody, any other questions?
I have a couple.
Okay.
Kevin, you mentioned that our Prairie State Achievement Test that we're doing well on our test. But if I look at page 7, the 2 tables on the bottom, Do we have a plan in place? If I look at the percentage, I'm assuming these are percentage, across the board, reading, mathematics, and science, about 25% of our student population is not meeting standards. Do we have a plan in place?
Correct.
That's a fourth of our student population.
Correct. There's two ways to look at it. One, we do have a plan in place, and we have some great interventions in place, and that's one of those things that we were talking about, of having to identify when we start our finance discussions after the first of the year of what interventions we're going to keep in place to continue to try to work with that lower 25%. On another note, to have 75% of your juniors in both math and reading meeting or exceeding state standards, which is the ACT test, that's a fairly good chunk of students. Now, obviously, 100% is what the goal of No Child Left Behind, and that should be the goal of any educator. But the state average on the ACT is 20.6, and right now we have an average of 23.3. So we're doing very well, but we do have some plans in place to work with some of the subgroups and students that are not meeting or exceeding. So it is alarming, but when you look at it kind of a bigger picture, we're still having some significant success in the academics of this building.
Do we have any historical data on that? Do we know if that 25% is larger than
Well,
it has
it's
been?
actually that the percentage not meeting and exceeding is going down, and the percentage making that mark is going up. And when I gave the assessment report earlier this fall, it did have historical data going back over 3 years on the PSAE chart, and on the ACT scores, we gave you 5 years. So it's been steady growth over time. We continue to grow the number that are meeting and exceeding. So we're going in the right direction with that. Remembering that as demographics have changed over time and students coming to us with more learning challenges, we've responded and brought our students up to where they need to be. We've put in interventions with extended math and reading classes, with that academic support, pushing in reading and math interventionists to students who are continuing to struggle even in that setting, and their progress monitored very closely. We have teams that look at scores consistently every few weeks, and can tell you exactly where every student is in terms of those reading and math scores. So we do monitor it very closely. It's a time-intensive process.
So on that same line, then if you go to page 8, and I don't know if we're increasing here. If we look at reading, mathematics, science by ethnic background, it appears to me that there's a multimodal distribution in the school district.
Better define that.
Can you define multimodal?
Well, between the different ethnic groups, the mean is dramatically different.
Exactly.
And so if we were to chart the
Yeah.
groups, there'd be like 3 little bumps on the same table.
Right.
One thing is the size of those subgroups. And the state only recognizes officially subgroups of 45 or more. So right now, I believe we have 2 subgroups, which is our Hispanic population and our free and reduced lunch population.
Correct.
Not like this, this is 60%.
So we've monitored, and on that assessment report, we did look at what some of those subgroups were doing and how they were, the areas they had shown strength or growth, and the areas they were struggling with, and also compared it to what's going on in the state. So yeah, we did have that highlight. I don't know if you want me to go back over this document, the assessment report from before.
See if I can interpret it and
Yeah.
following up on hers. Just like she asked before, we have a percentage that are the 2 lower levels that don't meet or exceed, but on every category, we're way above the state on every reported group here as far as who meets or exceeds, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, it is true the subgroups, most of them anyway, there's a higher percentage than the average in the lower groups, but in every case, every one of our subgroups, the meets and exceed is much higher than that subgroup for the state, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
But Tim, if we look at all our seniors,
Right.
and you're looking at ACTs, one nice little curve, you're going to have one ethnic group all to the right, and those are going to be the ones who get scholarships and grants and opportunities, and you're going to have one little group to the left tail. And so...
Do you know that for sure? Is that true?
Well, I think this is part of why, what you're talking about, is part of why the state is going to go to a growth model. So that you're also looking at when you get your learners in your door, how you grow them and how much progress they show. Because you're looking at a stagnant score, but you're not seeing here how far we progressed with that student or child. And I think that's what the new model is going to look at, to how to hold us accountable for taking the students where they are and having some, bringing them to a better place and showing growth. So it's one score in a moment in time, and what would be helpful to know is, where did those students come in with their reading scores, and have they improved them? So, but yes, we're always concerned when we have students that aren't performing to what the standard would be, and we try to respond to that.
Any other questions?
Yes, I do. On page 7, the same chart that Laura was referring to.
At the bottom?
Yes.
Bottom or top?
At the bottom.
Okay.
Okay, if you look at reading or science, you can take grade 11 all. I'm talking about our highest achievers. Okay, group 4 is like 20% of the students in both science and reading are high achievers. How come math is only 10%? I mean, there's got to be something here that explains that, and I think it's very important that mathematics is essential for any technology or high-tech college admissions. I think we need to look at that.
Okay, so what we look at is there are our AYP math scores grew 1.6%, but this chart, which includes everybody, remembering your AYP scores include students who were enrolled in your school from May 1 of the previous year. So you've had at least almost a full year to work on progressing and growing those students. But the Prairie's, these scores here are everybody. So you could have had a student transfer in a few weeks before, or transfer in earlier in the semester, and their scores are included here. So our AYP math scores did increase from the previous year, but on this full Prairie State, the meeting and exceeding went down, decreased from the previous year by 0.2. But the state decreased by more than I think it was 1.4 is what I have here in my chart. So all the math scores in the state went down from the previous year. We're not sure, remember it's a different test every year. We're not sure what happened, but our scores, dropped just a little bit, but the whole state dropped 1.4. So math tends to be a more difficult, challenging part of the test across the state. And that's what you're seeing a little bit, is it is more difficult to get kids in that exceeds category, Dr. Keene.
Well, I think my problem with that is, if you look at the distribution for the state, it's basically a normal distribution. You look at the third row, that's a normal distribution, which you'd expect. Our distribution is skewed to our benefit, but math is not as skewed as either reading or science. So I don't...
Right, we're getting more students in that third category, but not in the top.
Instead of fourth, right. So
right.
My question is, why is that?
And one thing that I also think we need to take into consideration is that for this assessment, the ACT is the primary tool. So you have juniors who have only had 3 years of math, and unless they came in on an advanced track and are at a higher level of calculus or a higher level by their third year of their spring, you'll usually see an increase in that score when they take it again in their senior year and have a composite, because then they'll have the 4th year of another course of advanced math underneath their belt. Where the science test, even though the science college readiness level for the ACT is, I believe it's a 24, it's a predominantly reading test. And the same thing with the reading test, it's predominantly reading and comprehension, where the math test is strictly skill-based off of previously not gained knowledge. If that makes that helps.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, you'd be more concerned if the ACT was, off compared to the, the science score.
Right.
But it still shows a deficiency.
I would agree.
All right, any other questions?
And just one last one on page 2.
Okay.
On our expenditures, so, Tim, is in the other expenditure column, is that so much greater than our instruction because of the referendum? And how long would we expect to see that column look like that?
Which one are you talking
Which one
about?
is?
The third table on page 2. It looks like we're spending, well,
It's because of the
Yeah,
construction.
it's the
The construction.
We have 19 million.
so
This
next
is-
year, should that,
This
because
is-
we're spending twice as much on something else than instruction.
Yeah, that
It'll
was the
go away.
19 million,
Yeah.
with the payments due in 2009 and 10 still from the construction project.
That's right, and it shows in, if you want to check that, page 3, in which I brought it before, under expenditures, last line item, $19,794,878, which you will not have. All right, any other questions?
I would
Okay.
could I just highlight one thing that's
You
really
can highlight
great?
anything you want.
I would like you to notice the percentage of our teachers that have master's degrees or above are, it's 83.9% as compared to the state at 60.4%. So we have great staff that's always looking to further their education, and I think that benefits our students as well. So I want to
Just
give
a
them.
quick question
Yeah.
about that. Does that also include instruction level at 1 through 8?
I don't, when
Which page?
Roseanne Marshall,
Page,
working in HR,
2.
totaled that, I actually thought she said there were
Page 2, okay.
85%.
I did read it.
But-
I'm nevertheless very
Right.
impressed with our
Yeah,
staff.
But that's true, it
They're
could
awesome.
include some of those other people, but I thought I had heard when she was submitting that number had,
Yeah.
was in the 80s.
Yeah, I was poking around at District
76.
96, and I think it's substantially less that have the levels of master's degrees.
All right.
Anyway, it's very well.